Okay, so we know that Lorenzo and Nia have been successfully operating as a cartel, but the dynamic between cartels we know is very tenuous. Cartels are most likely going to have a situation where one of them cheats on the agreement because it's in their own best interest to do so. So Lorenzo in this case is the first one who's going to cheat. And he says, if I increase my production to 45 gallons more than the cartel amount, I can increase my profit even though her profit goes down. So then he's going to start doing that tomorrow. So because of that, we just have to look up here and note that he's going to increase his production by 45 units. So it's going to go from 270 to 315. But the important thing to remember there is that that's not going to be split equally. That increase in production is only going to be for Lorenzo, but the price is going to be lower for everyone in the market. So because of that, you can see that Lorenzo's profits are going to be greater than Na's profits. And because of that, the price is decreasing. And now, because there's a deviation from the cartel agreement, now Nia's is also going to increase her production. And so when she does that, now it moves from 315 to 360. So now we move down to an even lower price. And note that at this point, profits or total revenues are almost $100 lower. So because of that, they're both going to be making $360 in profit. So everyone is making less profit when you cheat on the cartel agreement. And so the next question was asking about the output effect. And I just kind of wanted to explain that really quickly. So the output effect is basically just when revenue gained from the sale of additional units of output when production is increased. So that is basically saying that when price is above marginal cost, the output effect is positive because it increases profits because the revenue obtained from selling one more unit of output exceeds the cost of producing it. So that's the output effect. The price effect, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. So basically the price effect refers to the decline in price of each unit sold when output is increased. And the reason that both of these are true is because demand is downward sloping. So we know that to increase the price of the good, the company has to sell less. So the price effect negatively affects profits on all previous units sold, because to sell one more unit, you have to decrease the price on that unit. So producers who choose to increase output when the output effect is greater than the price effect, and to reduce output when the price effect is greater than the output effect. And so given that all the producers deviate from the cartel quantity, the output effect must have been larger, or it would have not been in either's best interest to increase production. So basically all that's saying is that moving from 270 to 315, you can see that the output effect is greater. Basically by increasing the price or increasing the output, they're going to be losing money because we can see that the total revenue is decreasing. And so finally, the behavior in this example is a tit-for-tat strategy. And all that means in simple terms is if one person cheats on an agreement, the other person is going to cheat on the agreement too. And the reason for that is just because if you cheat on the agreement, I am not benefiting. I'm actually losing. So it's in my best interest to also cheat on the agreement. So that's what just the tit-for-tat strategy means. And then somewhat related to that is the dominant strategy. So the dominant strategy is just the strategy that is best for a player in a game versus the prisoner's dilemma, which is just a game between two captured prisoners. And the point of the prisoner's dilemma is really designed to illustrate why cooperation is difficult to maintain. And the reason for that is just really the idea that if two people are unable to share information, they're going to choose what's in their own best interest. And it's hard for them to cooperate because they have to trust the other person to cooperate. And in most instances, that's not what a rational person would do in that situation. Okay, so the next question was from chapter 17, and it was asking about, so it gives you this table, you are given some information, so you are going to assume that each company that provides these subscriptions, and in this case for internet radio, has an annual fixed cost of $20,000 per year, and the marginal cost of providing an additional subscription is always 16. So in this case, it's important because you know what the marginal cost is, and you can use that information to figure out what the total revenue is and the marginal revenue. So remember, marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost for monopolistically competitive or duopoly firms. So in this instance, it was actually kind of easy because the question allowed us to cheat a little bit. Normally, price is not going to be the thing you're going to use to compute marginal revenue. But because in this instance, the question kind of gave you a little bit of a cheat, where they were able to show you that the 32 divided by 2 is 16, which is matching marginal cost. That allows you to be able to determine the number of subscriptions sold. But normally what you would do is you would compute total revenue and marginal revenue for every single one of these. And then wherever marginal revenue equaled to marginal cost or was close to marginal cost, that's the amount you would choose. So for example, for the first scenario where the price is 500 and the quantity is, the price is 60 and the quantity is 500, that's going to give you total revenue of 30,000. And then if you want to compute marginal revenue, I'll show you how you would do that as well. So basically marginal revenue, remember, is just the change in total revenue over the change in quantity. So for this one, that's actually really easy because all you do is you have the prior total revenue of 0. So it's just going to be 30,000 minus 0 over the quantity, which in this case is going to be, once again, 500 minus 0. So that's all you're going to do to compute the marginal revenue. And you would do that to allow you to determine where the marginal revenue meets the marginal cost, which is really important for determining how you're going to be able to actually get the quantity. Okay, so the next question we had was from chapter 14, question 3 on the pre-lecture quiz. So the first piece that's important to note here is how to determine fixed cost and variable cost. So you'll note here that the fixed cost is $50, and you get that just by looking at the fixed cost or the item that's not changing in the total cost equation. And so we see that 50 is constant, so we know that that is the fixed cost. And then the variable cost we see is just the item that has quantity attached to it. So now the next question then is asking you to determine the average total cost. So average total cost we know is the total cost over quantity. So all we would do is plug in the total cost equation and divide it by Q, which is going to give us 50Q plus 1/2 Q. Because effectively what you do here is you just cross that out and cross that out, so you're just left with 1/2 Q. So then you take that down, and then all you need to do is just plug in for where Q is here into this equation. So I did it for example for the 5. So just plug in 5, which gives you 1250. And you would just do that for all of these examples below. And so when you do that, you see that average total cost is at a minimum at 10 units. So that's how you know that the quantity that the firm is going to produce is going to be 10. And then when it's asking us which of the following represents the equation for each firm's supply curve in the short run, remember, we were given the marginal cost here, and we know that the marginal cost curve is the supply curve. So that's going to be easy. That's just going to be Q. And then this piece right here, though, in the long run, the firm will remain in the market if quantity is greater than or equal to 10. And we know that because this here, the average total cost is $10. So we know that the firm is going to continue to produce if the quantity is going to be greater than 10, because that's just effectively where the firm can make a profit. So then finally, we're given this example of a short run scenario. And in this scenario, we basically just set both of these equations to be equal to one another, because we're going to find the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity, which we do when we get 16 and 96. And the final piece, each firm produces 16 units. You just get that by taking the total market quantity and dividing it by the number of firms, which gives us 16. And then to determine profit, we know that profit is total revenue. So total revenue minus total cost. So to do that, we're just going to take the profit here, so the quantity and the price, and then the total cost equation, and plug in the quantity, and that's going to give us 78. And the final piece of this question is, in the long run with free entry and exit, the equilibrium price is $10. And we know that because if there's free entry and exit, all profits are going to get competed away. So there's going to be zero profit in the long run. And the total quantity produced is going to be 120. And we know that because we just take the minimum ATC here price, and we plug that into the quantity demanded equation, which gives us 120. And then we just take the 120 divided by the 10 firms, which gives us 12. Or sorry, the price here. And then the marginal cost is equal to price, which in this case is just going to give us the MC is equal to 10. And we get the 10 from up here. And we know it's 10 once again, because that is the lowest average total cost. Okay, so now moving to question 9 from the practice final. So this question was asking about you're given demand and supply, and the government implements a price floor of $60. So this question is actually pretty straightforward, which is nice, because all you need to do is plug the price in to the equation here, to the quantity demand and quantity supplied, and then just solve for the supply and demand. So for supply, we see it's 67.5, and for demand, it's 45. So then all we do to determine the surplus or shortage, which in this case, we know since it's a binding price floor, it's going to be a surplus, is we just take 67.5 minus 45, which gives us the 22.5 for the surplus. Okay. The next question then was asking about this graph and this specific question. So refer to figure, the perfect competition figure, and at a price of $6, this firm will what? So we know first off that the $6 threshold is going to allow the firm to continue to operate in the short run because it's above the average variable cost curve, but it's below the average total cost curve. So if that price continues in the long run, the firm is going to exit. In the short run, though, the firm is going to stay in business. So let's look through these questions here. So A is asking increase profits by increasing output from 9 to 11 units. So if the firm does increase output from 9 to 11, you're moving from this to this, which seems like it would be a good situation. But really important in this question, the price is going to stay at $6. So if the firm increases the production, it's going to actually lose more and more money because it's producing more units, but the price it's getting is $6 per unit. So A is not correct. For B, the firm should shut down in the short run because it's losing money. So no, because the price is above the average variable cost. So we know that the firm should not shut down in the short run. So B is not correct. C, exit in the long run only if price falls below 425. So we also know in the long run, the firm is actually going to exit if price is not above $10. So we know that C is also not correct. So then that leaves D, which is continue to operate in the short run, and that is the correct answer because the price of $6 is lower than the average variable cost curve. Okay, so the next question, which was E, was asking, could the number of firms in an oligopoly negatively affect the outcome in the market? So for this question, yes. So yes, the more firms there are, the more likely that the firms will break the collusion agreement. And this would be basically beneficial to consumers because that would mean that the firms would get closer to perfect competition, which would increase consumer surplus and total surplus. So that would be good for consumers, but bad for the firms that are still in the market. So kind of an important caveat there. Okay, so then the next question was asking to go over kind of an example of a profit maximization and kind of what that looks like on a graph. So let me try to zoom out. Okay, so the first thing we know for monopolistic competition is they profit maximize when the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. So MR equal to MC. And so in this graph, we see this is the MR curve, this line right here, and this is the MC curve. So this is the point where the company or firm is going to produce. And to determine the profit, we have to go up from there, and then the intersection of the marginal revenue, marginal cost quantity production is where the firm is going to, in this case, charge consumers. So consumers are going to pay $4.50. We see that the firm's average total costs are $4. So then we know that if we took profit, which is equal to $4.50 minus $4 and multiply that by 400, we would get the profit. We could also compute the area of the rectangle, which is basically what I did right here. And that's going to give us the profit. And it looks like that is the last question. So I'll just really quickly remind everyone about the final, which is on the 20th. Also, I will be reminding everyone as well, I will be hosting a couple of kind of review sessions throughout the week. So I'll send out an email about that. And then finally, if you have any questions about your grades or anything, please feel free to email me. And if you have any questions about the practice final, I will be posting the video review, which is going to be on the 13th. I will post that to Blackboard once it is done as well. So have a great rest of your week, and feel free to email me if you have any questions about the final. Cheers. Yeah. Okay, so I did just want to review one question from the prior group, just because I think it's kind of a good question to talk about. So this question is asking, could the number of firms in an oligopoly negatively affect the outcome in the market? And so the answer is yes. So the more firms there are, the more likely that the firms will break their collusion agreement. And this would be beneficial to consumers because remember, monopolistic competition negatively impacts consumers, and monopolistic competition is bad for consumers, as are monopoly firms. So if there are more firms in an oligopoly, that is going to increase the likelihood that the firms are going to cheat on the agreement. And when firms cheat on the agreement, that gets each firm and the market overall closer to perfect competition, which as consumers, we really like because that minimizes the amount of money that we have to pay for the goods that we're consuming. Okay, so the first question from your group was on monopolistic competition and just kind of understanding the transition from the short run to the long run. And so this is a pretty important piece just because what it is showing is basically how firms move from generating profits to the scenario where all profits are zero in perfect competition, because we remember that for monopolistic competition, in the long run, there is effectively no long run profits. Everyone transitions to zero profits. And the reason for that is because additional firms are going to enter the market. And additional firms enter the market through the process of basically seeing that there are profits in the market. And when they enter the market, that decreases profits ever so slightly. And that continues to occur until there are no profits in the market. So that's basically how the transition from short run to long run occurs. Just a new firm enters the market when it sees a profit, that decreases profits for everyone else in the market. And then that just keeps on occurring until you'll notice here that the demand curve and the ATC have shifted in that both of them are now in a scenario where the ATC and the demand curve meet, whereas before the ATC or the average total cost curve was below the demand curve, which meant the firm was making profits. Okay. So the next question was from pre-lecture quiz chapter 14 and question 3. So the first thing to note is that when you see the total cost equation, you want to note which one or which part of the equation are fixed costs and which part are variable costs. So fixed costs don't change regardless of the quantity. So we note here that fixed costs are $50 and variable costs are just 1/2 Q squared. So that answers this question here. And to determine the average total cost, which you're asked to do right here, all you need to do is just take the total cost equation and divide it by the quantity, which when we do that, we just take the 50 plus 1/2 Q squared. So that right there. Then we get Q, which is just quantity, and we just solve for that. So we get 50Q and 1/2 Q. And to get 1/2 Q, all you do is you just cross that and cross that. So you're left with 1/2 Q. And then all you're going to do to solve the average total cost in this column is you just plug in the quantity to the equation we have up here. So for the first one I've done it, you just plug in 5 and 5, and you're given 1250. And we are then asked to understand or compute what is the winner average total cost at a minimum. So we see that they're at a minimum when the quantity is 10. So that is where the average total costs are the lowest. So then the next question is asking us, what represents each firm's supply curve? And remember, in the short run, unless you're given a supply curve, you always know the supply curve is going to be marginal cost. And so in this instance, because the marginal cost equation is just marginal cost equals Q, we just know that the supply curve is Q, or quantity. And in the long run, the firm will remain in a market if the quantity is greater than or equal to 10. If it's lower than 10, or effectively, we can see here, if the quantity is lower, we know that the firm is going to be not at the point where marginal cost and marginal revenue are equal to one another. Okay, so to solve the next piece where there are 6 firms in the market, all we need to do is just set the demand and supply equations to be equal to one another, which gives us a price of $16 when we solve it. And that's just the normal solving for the equilibrium price. Then we just plug in the 16 into the either supply or demand equation. And when we do that, we find that the quantity is 96. And to determine the number each firm produces, we just take 96 and divide it by 6, which are the number of firms in the market, which we get 16. So then we have to determine the profit. So remember, profit is just total revenue minus total cost. And we have a total cost curve here, which is this, the equation that we were given in the beginning of the problem. And profit is just the quantity times price, which in this case is going to be 16 times 16. And we find that profit is $78. So finally, in the long run, with free entry and exit, the equilibrium price is going to be $10, because remember, the firms are always going to produce at the minimum average total cost in the long run, and that is at $10. And to determine the market quantity, all we need to do is plug in 10 to either the demand or supply equation, and we're given 120. So we know the market produces 120 units. And because we know the price, all we need to do is just divide the 120 by the price. And that's also the supply curve, because remember, the marginal cost curve is the supply curve. And because we know that the price is $10, marginal cost is also $10. And by taking the quantity in the marginal cost, we're given the 12 firms in the market. And that gives us the 12 firms. And we know then that each firm is going to produce 10 units. Okay. So the next question was asking about Nash equilibrium. So I think it's important first to explain what Nash equilibrium is, because it is kind of a weird concept. So the idea of Nash equilibrium is basically that each player in the game, if they were to know the other player was playing the Nash equilibrium, they would continue to play the Nash equilibrium. So that it's important though to note that the Nash equilibrium is not the best strategy. It is an equilibrium. So it's just the strategy that both are given or that both come to when they know what the other firm is doing. And so in this example, I've kind of walked through it. So the first thing is if firm 2 chooses to produce W, firm 1 chooses to produce B. And we know that because, so let's say firm 2 is going to choose W. So now firm 1 is going to say, well, I could produce either A, B, C, or D. So at A, I have a profit of 2, B, I have a profit of 5, C, I have a profit of 4, and D, I have a profit of 3. So my best choice if firm 2 is going to produce W is to produce 5. Now let's do it for firm 1. So let's say that firm 1 is going to produce A. So what is firm 2 going to produce? So if they produce W, they make a profit of 9, X a profit of 8, Y a profit of 7, and Z a profit of 6. So firm 2 is going to choose to produce W. And so then all you're going to do is you basically do that for each scenario. And you know then that firm 1 is never going to choose to produce C, and firm 2 is never going to choose to produce Y or Z. And you know then that the Nash equilibrium is where both firms choose the same little square. So in this case, that happens when firm 1 produces B and firm 2 produces X. So this is our Nash equilibrium for this game, where firm 1 makes a profit of $8 and firm 2 makes a profit of $5. So that is how you determine Nash equilibrium, and that's just kind of the generic process of Nash equilibrium. Okay, so the next question was from pre-lecture quiz, chapter 15, question 3. So this question is actually a good question, and kind of a good question because it actually really gets us to think about what is the perfect price discrimination, because this doesn't really happen in the real world, but it's really, really important that we understand what that looks like. So the question is asking us, if the monopolist can engage in perfect price discrimination, what is the total revenue when 3 ties are sold? So for perfect price discrimination, we know that 1 tie is going to be sold at a price of 160. Another tie is going to be sold at a price of 150. And the final tie is going to be sold at a price of 140. And the reason for that is because the firm can perfectly price discriminate. And so they charge the first person 160, the second person 150, and the third person 140, which gives us a total revenue of 450, which in this case is D. Okay. So the next question then was from the pre-lecture quiz, chapter 16, question 1. So this question is asking, Delish, a moderately priced restaurant, has recently announced intentions to open a restaurant in Boston, Massachusetts. Assume the restaurant market in Boston is characterized by monopolistic competition. So this question then asks us to look at, as a result of the new restaurant, existing restaurant owners in Boston are likely to experience what? So we know that product variety externality is a positive externality to consumers. So we can cross out A because product variety externality is not a negative externality. We can also cross out B because we know business stealing is a negative externality. So then, because this question is asking about specifically the restaurant owners, we know that it's going to be D because D is specific to producers, where business stealing externality is a negative externality. So that's how we know that it's D and not C, because they're asking specifically about the producers. Okay, then the next question was from chapter 17, and it was asking about basically given a table and kind of a similar setup, what is the two internet radio providers that operate in this market? What is their quantity of subscriptions that will be sold on price and that will be charged for their subscription? So we figure this out by first remembering that marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So what we're going to do is we actually need to compute the total revenue and marginal revenue for every single piece. So I did that in an Excel document. But we know that marginal revenue is equal to total revenue over quantity. And so the marginal cost here is 16. And from this, we see that between a price of 40 and 36, marginal revenue is between 16. And so importantly here, we are going to choose the price of 40, because if we go below 16, what that means is that we're actually losing money on each additional unit we produce, even though revenue is higher. And I know that seems kind of counterintuitive, but you do not want to produce where marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. That just doesn't make sense for a monopolistically competitive firm. So because of that, each firm charges a price of 40 and each firm sells 1,500 subscriptions. Okay, so the next question was asking about predatory pricing. So predatory pricing is really bad for the competition, because what predatory pricing means is that one firm sets a price lower than their marginal cost and basically tries to force other companies out of the market so it can become a monopoly and then raise prices. So it's good for that one individual firm, but it's bad for the competition because it forces them to go out of business. This is actually something that Amazon does, and it is known for selling products at really low cost, partially because it has economies of scale, but also because it tries to drive other companies out of business so it can maintain a larger market share. And the next question was asking about what tit-for-tat is. And so tit-for-tat is the idea that if one firm cheats on an agreement and produces more than the other firm, that other firm is also going to cheat. So basically, if one firm cheats, that means that I'm going to cheat. And then if I cheat, the other firm cheats again. And that just kind of continues to go on until the outcome is close to or at perfect competition. And consumers like that because we want perfect competition, because that increases our consumer surplus. Okay. And then the final question was asking about the impact of a monopoly. So this question is basically saying, if a certain market were a monopoly, then the monopolist would maximize its profits by producing 4,000 units of output. If instead that market were a duopoly, then which of the following outcomes would be most likely if the duopolists successfully collude? So actually, the nice thing about this question is that you just need to add up the total units of production just to double check that they don't exceed 4,000 units. So for the first question, we take 3,000 plus 1,500, and that gives us 4,500. So we know that that is not correct. The next question is asking us, each duopolist produces 4,000 units of output. We know that that's not correct because that would give us 8,000 total units, because that would just be 4,000 times the two companies, which would give us 8,000. So it can't be B. So then for C, which is represented by this, we are shown that 2,400 plus 1,600 equals 4,000. So that one looks good, but let's just double check for D. So for D, it's 1,500 times 2, which gives us 3,000, which is less than 4,000. So it cannot be D. So then that means that C is the only correct answer, and that's the answer that we choose. Okay, so I believe that is all the questions. So just really quickly,